the other thing that really helped me get over that fear, it's being vulnerable, and part of being vulnerable is believing in the fact that if I share this, or I am the face of my business, or I am willing to look silly or screw up, then that empowers other people to do the same. And the message, you have to believe so much in the message that what you're doing is it's bigger than yourself, right? It's for your audience. It's not for you.
That was Meg Adams, co-founder of Home Place Creative Company, a bespoke video content studio in Canton, Ohio, where amazing organizations harness the power of story. As a TEDx speaker and professor of digital communication, Meg is an expert in compelling speaking and has helped hundreds of students and business owners leverage the power of effective visual storytelling. As a business owner, captivating an audience is not easy, especially if you're new and you have any sort of imposter syndrome. But just like business, storytelling and communication are skills that can be learned. So in this exciting chat with Megan, expect to learn what makes compelling storytellers, how a TEDx speaker prepares for the biggest talk of her life, actionable strategies to become more articulate as a business owner, and much, much more. Megan is awesome. I'm super grateful for her time coming on the show. Be sure you check out her and Kyle over at Home Place Creative. All of their links and information will be in the description/show notes below. Without further ado, I am your host, Andy of MMG Design, your collaborative partner for branding, web design, and marketing creative. And you're listening to entry number 65 of the Creative Journal podcast with none other than the lovely Meg Adams. I hope you guys enjoy. Let's dive on in. Like what you guys do is you take people through kind of the process of telling their own story, and curating like an environment for that is like something to do with comfort, and then getting them to get out there. And I think like storytelling on camera like now is such a valuable skill to have, but it's so uncomfortable for a lot of people, especially me. So like, is there anything that you guys do to like curate that environment and make it a little easier for people?
Absolutely. So I have learned this, just like everything that I've learned, Andy, through failure. So I used to be, my background, and my husband, Kyle, we were both television journalists. And so, I mean, in that job, you're interviewing 3 to 4 people a day. You have to do it very quickly. You have to produce that story in the same day. So it was really just sort of like sink or swim in the environment. I really didn't have a lot of prep. I was a print journalist in my, that was my degree. So going into broadcast journalism was totally different. And one of the things that I learned very quickly was the way that I approach the environment, that my vibe, if you will, is the word I guess I would use, the best word to describe it. The way I walked into the situation, if I walked in stressed out, okay, I got to get this right now. We got to go. Tell me. Then my interviewee would always mirror that. And so that's a big piece of advice that I've learned. Like, the more comfortable and confident and just open you are to people, the more that they're going to mirror that back to you. So one of the, very practical things that we always do, I never go into any situation where someone's going to be on camera and have the camera rolling, just like you did today. I always will have some conversation beforehand. Like you said, how are you doing this week? Yeah, that's great. It sort of eases them into the camera being on, as opposed to like, okay, great, you're here, let's record, right? I think that chit chat, if you will, is really important for people to just get comfortable with you as the interviewer, and to realize that this is just a conversation. And that's how I approach any video that we're doing, whether that's an interview for a brand video or a documentary or even a podcast. It's, hey, this is just a conversation between 2 people. And my favorite compliment and my goal of every situation where I have somebody on camera is that they forget the camera's there. Because I think that's when you get to the true, honest, genuine conversation. And it's hard to get there. You can tell, I'm sure you've done this for a year, you said, Andy, so I'm sure you know this, but sometimes it takes like 45 minutes before you start to see those layers peel away with people, right? And some people have done it for a while and they're more natural. Some people have their sound bites ready to go and they'll perform. But I think the more that you can just approach it as a conversation, the better off you'll be. And I will say, the highest compliment that I could get, and I get it often, is, man, that was so much easier than I thought it was going to be.
By the way, if you're a marketing leader or a business owner and you want to start your reading habit, the Essential Marketer's Reading Checklist, the best books on business and marketing that you can browse through, test drive, see if you like, included difficulties, page summaries, actionable quotes, and a link to the cheapest place online if you want to buy it and read the whole thing for yourself. Literally a place to test drive a library of all the most helpful books on business without having to buy it beforehand and give you a chance if you want to see if you like it. First link in the description.
Or, you know what? I totally I've heard people say, I forgot the camera was even there. And I'm like,
Yeah.
yes, that was the goal.
That is
Yeah.
that is kind of the highest priority compliment you can get. Like I can't even
Yeah.
like where does that emotion come from though? And I like we all kind of go through it now, especially in a world of video and
Hmm.
where you can build such a good connection with an audience. Like that's such a superpower. Like even I'm learning like small business owners and especially freelancers where they're traditionally very and even especially creatives too. People are very like in the work, crafts
Hmm.
people, and they don't really want to be the business owners, the people that are have a forward face that are attached to the work that they're
Yes.
doing. So like it's just such an easy way to set yourself up, not a very hard way to set yourself apart, but it's a very clear way to set yourself apart if you can
Sure.
communicate well on camera and build an audience
Hmm.
and empathy. But where does that like emotion come from? Like that fear? I think like trying to label these things is productive because it's just so inherent. Like even now, like I said, we've been doing it for a year now, and every time you prepare in front of like you put a lot of pressure on yourself. Where
Hmm.
does that come from, and how do you help people like get over that? Is there any like pep talking you have to do?
Yeah, I mean, I would say I had to do this for myself too. I think everything again that I've learned, I sort of learned by doing. And
Mm,
I think for me, part of it, this is a two-part answer. I mean, the first part is just forgetting about yourself. So, like you said, like, I think a lot of people, we're all just really focused on ourselves. Like, we're the hero of our own stories. But in reality, like, everybody's walking around the world focused on their self. Like
right.
my 10-year-old, I had to tell her this the other day. She's like hitting
Mm.
preteen. I'm like, listen, nobody cares. Like everybody's worried
Take
about
it down a
themselves.
notch. Yeah.
Take the
Yeah.
pressure off yourself. And I say this
Hmm.
from someone who had crippling anxiety as an anchor. Like I would go live on
Mm.
TV and just hate it. Like I hated it.
Yeah.
And I would be so critical. And then finally I got to a point where I was like, well, like it doesn't matter. Like, who cares? Like, what's the worst thing? Sometimes I'll go to worst case. Like, what's the worst thing that can happen? I screw up. I say the wrong
Yeah.
word. I'll just correct myself. Like, nobody's judging you as hard as you judge yourself. And I think like
Hmm.
the other pep talk I give myself, and this was one that I learned recently, was that if you're so concerned about yourself, you're not focusing on the people that the service side of it. So like the reason I am talking to you today is because I think that, I really want people to tell their stories. I think the world will change when we learn to tell and listen to stories to build true connections. I honestly believe that in my heart. It drove me to be a
Mm.
journalist. I research it now. I teach it. But I think the bigger part of that is like it's being vulnerable, and part of being
Hmm.
vulnerable is believing in the fact that if I share this or I am the face of my business or I am willing to look silly or screw up, then that empowers other people to do the same. And the message, you have to believe so much in the message that what you're doing is, this sounds so cliche, but it's bigger than yourself, right? It's for your
Hmm.
audience. It's not for you. I
Yeah.
think that was the other thing that really helped me get over that
Mm.
fear and just like, so that two-parter, like taking the pressure off, like it's really not that big of a deal in the end. Like you're not, look at, I mean, like if you look at people in general, like, like it's almost like we live in an era too, Andy, where like if people really respond when people are their authentic, honest selves. Like these
Hmm.
polished professional soundbite, we're past that. I don't think
Hmm.
people respond to that in a way. They're skeptical of it, in the way that they did before. So I think
Hmm.
the more you can just be confident in what you're saying, like again, if you really believe in it and you know your stuff, you're going to naturally speak with that confidence. And again, I think that reminder of you're there to serve other people. And then if you don't
Hmm.
do it, you're just going to miss out on all the rewards of connection and
Hmm.
relationships, which is to me like
Yeah.
the real currency of business nowadays and organizational, structure, or like you said, branding and all that.
Yeah. And I think like the connection between like creator or business owner and consumer nowadays is so much closer than it was in the past, just
Oh
through
yeah.
like we talked about video. And I love
Hmm.
your reframe on like what's the worst that can happen. So like the first talk I ever like the first like real talk I ever gave that I was like really nervous for. Well, like I'm nervous for every talk, but this one I was like, okay, like I have to prepare for this. I'm gonna practice like speech in
Hmm.
the mirror. It was for the Fellowship of Christian Athletes here in Dublin.
Uh-huh.
Um, and like I felt totally unqualified to get it. I got it because of a connection from a networking group, but it was basically just a group of like 30 middle schoolers.
Oh, yeah.
And I was like, okay, is this going to be easier or harder than talking to adults? And I was like, well, it's probably harder because they're gonna, if it sucks, they're going to tell me like they're kids.
Oh yeah,
Um,
middle schoolers will
but
tell you.
yeah, that's what they said is that like, and this is there's this book called Ultra Learning. I forget
Uh-huh.
the author's name, but they talk about giving Toastmaster speeches, and
Mm.
they say to really stress test it, we go to the kids because they're going to tell us exactly what they think. Um, but that was like one of the biggest first speeches that I had, and that's what I literally talked about was fear setting. Is like Tim Ferriss has this blog post where like he does this exercise whenever he's reaching like a big decision point, where it's like literally what's the worst that could happen in this scenario, and then playing that loop like all the way through, and then you realize at the end of it you're like I'm totally fine. So like for
Yeah.
these middle school kids, they're like absolute stud athletes. Like literally already picking out colleges and like going on visits stuff like this. I was like, wow,
Yeah.
like you guys would have ran circles around me. But you know, I'm gonna put on my best show here. So like I brought two of them up, and two of them were one of them was a wrestler, one of them was a golfer, both like stud athletes. And I said, it's like, okay, Parker, you're getting ready to tee off. Your college coach is watching, and you shank it into the trees. What do you do next? It's like, oh, well, I'll get it out. I'll take a drop, you know, and I'll go through this and I'll do my routine and I'll put it back into play. I was like, okay, good. Now the girl that you like has showed up, and then you step in a hole and break your leg and all these things. And he was
Yeah.
just getting like super stressed out. When we got to the end of it, and he realized it was basically like, I'm gonna be okay. I was like, that's the whole point of this. And I think like we get so into the weeds of
Yeah.
like we kind of thrust
Right.
ourselves into these moments, and like you said, sometimes like once the camera's on, you're like there's no going back, and you realize like okay, the worst that could happen in this scenario, like you're still gonna walk out of it okay.
Right.
And that's why I love that like worst possible scenario because it kind of brings you back down to earth and takes you off your high horse a little bit.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and also
Especially for
like
achievers, you know, like you
yeah,
sound like you're an achiever. I think that's hard for like people that are perfectionists. Like I would say I'm a recovering perfectionist. I still struggle with that. Like if it's not
mhm,
perfect, it's not worth doing. And I think that that's held me back a lot in my career. If I look back and I'm like, the more I talk to people who are like a few steps ahead of me, um, I'm like, man, like they just did it, you know, and they
mhm,
weren't afraid. And they're just these open, generous people. And I'm like, sometimes I just kick myself. I'm like, if you would have been so concerned with having it be perfect, you could have been,
yeah.
you know, so, but everybody's a work in progress, Andy.
Yeah, it's like all have a front row seat at our own like shortcomings. And I've been
Yeah.
talking to like I'm very intentional of trying to speak to people that I feel like are like the two or three steps ahead.
Mhm.
And it's always this it's you just fall into it every single time. It's like, man, it seems so much easier for them. Like they
Yeah. Or
I'm sure
yeah,
they went through all this and didn't stress, you know.
sure.
And I mean, I've said this a million times, but the more you talk to people that like when you're interviewing someone, and I'm sure you've done this with the podcast too, is like you can logically someone will tell their story, and I'm like, okay, well that's so like logically obvious. They went to this job, they learned this skill set that gave them the confidence to do this, and then you know now they have this successful whatever business, you know, cash flowing, and then dissecting it and looking it back, you're like, actually in the moment they were stressing more so than I ever like
Hmm.
just as much as I am. Like when
Hmm.
they're in the moment, there's no logical sequence to the next step.
Yeah.
But then when you tell it, it's like it's all so much clearer. So
Yeah, because you have
um,
the perspective of being through it, so you can see how those dots connect in the journey. But when you're going through
mhm,
it, you don't really know. And then I would tell you this too. If you're not like constantly in that, that's what I love about business. Like it's like constant one upping. It's like like
Mm-hmm.
you're just growing. So you're in that, like, to me, if I'm not a little uncomfortable, or then I'm not like leveling up like I should, right? So I'm like,
Right.
you should be feeling like I don't know what I'm doing, or this is uncomfortable, or this is frustrating,
Mm-hmm.
like, and that's just, you just keep doing
Mm-hmm.
it.
Yeah, it's like a signal that you're actually like on the right path. It's like a beacon.
Exactly. Yeah.
Because I think like we also owe ourselves in this vision that like I'll just say I just have to go through this hard phase or this one hard decision, and after that it's going to be smooth sailing. Um, but then it never is.
Yeah.
So that's I mean
Part
the
of the
reality of being a
game.
business owner.
Fun.
I know,
Yeah.
right? Yeah. And I think like it takes conversations and kind of having the shared experiences of others feeling like, yeah, it never really gets easier, and it's I think the mutual like the shared understanding that we all kind of go through the same thing, like that's always been really big for me, especially like when you're in a kind of going on a path that not a lot of others do, like business
Hmm.
ownership and entrepreneurship and stuff like that.
Hmm.
Because you'll compare yourself to like people you grew up with, your family, people around you, and then like if you those are the only places you take feedback from, it can be really that's like the only thing that shifts your perception. So,
Hmm.
but what I wanted to talk to you about too is kind of like a subtle transition was your TED talk too. I
Hmm.
listened to it a few times, and I just want to like get into your mind of what the it was very good, by the way, you killed it.
Thank you.
Um, but what was it like kind of preparing for one like that? I mean, like I know like I was thinking I was like, okay, like this is like you're going up there to talk about storytelling, and the pressure is on you to like perform because this is like what
Yeah.
you're good at.
Hmm.
But then obviously, you know, Beast knocked it out of the park. So how did you like go about preparing for that, and what were the biggest lessons you kind of learned and practicing what you preach?
Well, thank you so much for that comment. And thank you. That means a lot. Yeah, it was, you very much nailed it. I felt a lot of pressure, like as a storyteller, to sort of, and that's what I was hoping to do, to enact like what I was teaching, which was this
Mm-hmm.
idea of perspective and how it's shaped and how it informs what we do and how we act. And so, in telling my own story, I tried to teach that. So it was
Mm-hmm.
an awesome process. I would, if you get a chance to do it, I would say that's another thing to take the pressure off of. So, I loved being coached. Like that was the best part of the whole thing. So they hire
Mm-hmm.
local coaches. I don't know if people know this when you do a TEDx talk, but you get, and in that I got a writing coach and a performance coach. And so they were
Oh, nice.
local to Lima where I gave the talk, but it was
Mm-hmm.
really neat to have the have other people look at your stuff and just be totally like a professor. Like I do this for students all the time, but I
Mm-hmm.
haven't had that happen for me since I've been in grad school, and I forgot what it was like to have other people as invested in your work and to be giving you feedback constantly.
Mm-hmm.
So that was
Yeah.
huge. And I know I should probably hire a coach, but it was really
Mm-hmm.
nice to do that instead.
Mm-hmm.
And so yeah, a lot of people don't know too. That was like a 6 month endeavor. So
Wow.
it's a long process from when you start to you actually deliver the talk. And it went through a lot of different versions, written and performed. And
Mm-hmm.
the other thing that I don't particularly like about the process, Andy, is that, and I get why they do it, but you have to memorize it. So like
Mm-hmm.
they want you to
Mm-hmm.
memorize the talk to make sure that you're within that time frame that they give you. That is not typically how I speak. And I've
Mm-hmm.
talked, so the other piece with the TED Talk was when I pitched it, there was a from a class. So this was one particular class that I teach, an intro to digital media class. I
Mm-hmm.
love this is like a 50-minute class that I teach. And I feel like every semester it would be the class where people's, like, you could see the like poof, like the
Mm-hmm.
little like light bulbs go off in their eyes and they would remember
Yeah.
it and evaluate. I was like, this is the thing I love teaching. So I was like, I'm going to take this down to 12, 15 minutes, right? This 50-minute lesson. So I
Mm-hmm.
can't drone on. I have to have it organized and focused. So that was new for me. Another fun tip, going back to your other question, was you don't know this in the video because they edited it, but my slides went out in the middle of that talk. So I was up there. I
Uh-huh.
put a ton of pressure on myself, as you might imagine. I'm like, I killed it. And we had like a practice beforehand, and I was feeling so good, like so
Mhm.
energized. I get up there, the slides go out. And because I had memorized it, I had like a brain fart, like a legit, oh my gosh, where was I in this talk? And I know from being on TV that when you're up on stage and something like that happens, like 10 seconds feels like an hour, even though it's only 10
Uh-huh.
seconds. Like I know that because I've
Yeah.
messed up on live TV before. But I was like, oh God. So I was just like, all right, I'm just going to pick up. And you wouldn't know this, but I left out a whole chunk of that talk on stage that I had memorized because I had brain farted when the slides went out. The slides go back up. They edited it. I think they edited like it out, most of it, like where it was just like kind of like a pause. And I looked up and the slide wasn't there. And I was like, okay, and just like kept going, but missed a part of
Uh-huh.
it. So I
Huh.
remember before I had went on, Andy, I was like pacing backstage, like reciting this memorization to myself. And the speaker before me was a psychiatrist. He's
Hmm.
been talking about perfectionism. Like that was his whole talk. It was just like one of those serendipitous moments. And he was like, Megan,
Uh-huh.
I'll never forget this. Like he knew I was nervous because I was the last one to talk too. So he like put his hand on my hand and he was like, it's not about you. It's about
Uh-huh.
what you have to give to the audience today. Just remember that. And I was like so glad he said that because in that moment when the slides went off, I was like, oh no, this is going to be on the internet forever. Like my giant brain part is going to be on my, you're just like, oh.
Yeah.
And I remember being, but then I remember like, no, like I remember like in that split second, I was like, just keep going. Like my old TV came back, my old TV skills, and I was like, just go, whatever. And I finished it and I watched it, and it wasn't in there, or what? I didn't seem like that, like because they didn't. When they edited it, they obviously edited the slides to the talk, so you couldn't see it go out, which was great. But
Yeah.
yeah, like I think I like it was, I don't know, Andy, I'm so hard on myself, but I think that goes back to your original question. Like I got off the stage and like my husband was there and one of my good friends, they're like, oh my gosh, you did so great. And I was like, I
Mhm.
screwed it up. It all screwed up. But
Mm.
you remember, like you go back to that point, like, okay, but why are you here? Like, are you here to, and a TEDx talk is kind of like one of those ego boost things, right? Like,
Yeah.
is it about you or is it about like what you have to teach? And I think the people that are really good at thought leadership and what they do are the people who are genuinely like, it's not about them. It's about what they have. They're like, they really care about their message. And I think that's the trick of it all because that trumps like that fear and it trumps that perfectionism and it trumps that, okay, you screwed up, like, but did people receive the message? Do you feel like you did well there? Do you think? And that's just a
Mhm.
message that I keep, I mean, I repeat that almost every talk that I give. I repeat that lesson of a deterministic screen that was in the TED talk, or how perspective is shaped. So you just
Mhm.
get better over time. But yeah, it's hard. And I will say too, I don't want to sound like I have it all figured out because almost before every talk I give, I still get a little nervous. Like, how's this going to go?
Mhm.
But the
Yeah.
TEDx talk was extra because I had to memorize it. That's the part that was really hard. Like, if I give a
Mhm.
keynote or a workshop, yes, I'm like always in time because I practice it, but I don't memorize it. So like, I tell the story a little different every time. I tell those
Mhm.
stories,
Yeah.
similar stories, but so that was that was my
Yeah.
TEDx story, which is kind
That's
of funny.
wow. Yeah, that's awesome. I mean, I think well the story makes it worth like everything, I think. But I think like even going through like a Super Bowl kind of moment like that, does it
Mhm.
put into perspective like when you go and give a lecture in class now, does it seem like a softball pitch compared to that? Or is there, I mean, maybe not like that easy, but is it
Yeah,
kind of
I
like put it
mean,
into perspective of like, okay, like this is where I am now, and then I can kind of, I don't have to live up to the standard that I have put myself up to before.
yeah, I mean, in some ways, I feel like a classroom is so much different because, like, the students, like, you feel like there's that intimacy with the audience that you don't have at like a TEDx talk or like a
Hmm.
workshop. Like, I try to get to that, like, in my workshops too, and even in my keynotes, I try to be really interactive with the audience. So I'll get some of their stories when I begin, this kind of figure out where they're at. And so I feel like I know them a little bit. Like I couldn't interact with the audience with the in the TEDx talk.
Mm-hmm.
It
Mm-hmm.
was there's a separation between like audience and
Yeah.
delivery, which I'm not used to. So yeah, and I wouldn't say it's a softball. But I think it's more interactive when I'm in a classroom or delivering a workshop because I'm like I get to know people, and you have a little bit. It feels like it's a little less. And I get why TEDx is the way it is. They're just different. Not one's better than the other, but they're just
Mm-hmm.
different environments. But
Yeah.
yeah, I enjoy the like back and forth, like you would
Mm-hmm.
get in a workshop, and I do
Dialogue.
that
Yeah.
in the keynote. Yeah, because I get to know
Mm-hmm.
people, and then they get to know me, and it's not just this like one way communication.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, that makes it a lot easier for me too. Like I'm very good at like speaking off the cuff and
Mm-hmm.
adjusting to what people's needs are in the moment, which is what I love about teaching too.
Yeah, I think that's like that comes from your experience, and I think just your personality too. Like you're very, I can tell you're very like socially aware, if that makes sense. And I think that's always something I'm trying to kind of cultivate is like reading the room and then like not putting the pressure on yourself to say the exact right thing, but
Yeah.
just knowing that like conversation is very fluid in itself,
Mhm.
and there's no like exact right or wrong thing to say. And so
Right.
really stressing about like trying to slot in like the exact perfect response or point to
Yeah.
make it doesn't really exist that way. So I think it's
No.
just kind of like passing through the outputs from other people through your filter and then seeing what naturally comes up is like
Mhm.
I think that's what authenticity is. And as
Mhm.
you can tell, like by the way I just explained that, like I do overthink this stuff a lot. So
So
um
no, that's good. I would say to not overthink it, Andy. This is something that the way that I've taught it too, because I've really been myself. Just I'm always trying to be a better listener, and so I think being a storyteller is to me more about listening almost than it is about the telling. And we don't teach that enough. But I would say the easiest way to think about it is just stay curious. Like be genuinely curious about other people and why they think the way they do. What have they learned? I believe every single person has like experienced similar things, right? Like beauty, despair, fear, and then you want to get that out of people, but then they need
mhm,
to be vulnerable, which there's that back and forth. Like I share a little of my story, you share a little of your story, but you have to be genuinely curious and interested, and then that comes out, and then that's how that connection forms, which is really the magic. Like so
mhm,
I'm sort of like shifting gears a little bit in some of my talks to say this isn't storytelling as much as it's like story catching or story collecting, because you really grow your perspective when you're in conversation with someone else, not just droning on about yourself, right? That's
mhm,
ego, or that's
mhm.
just like it's not where the real benefits of storytelling that we know from neuroscience occur. They don't occur in
Yeah.
that, like I'm saying, that one way. Yeah, you can maybe connect with me if I give a keynote or you watch my TEDx talk, but the real relationship is going to be born out of a conversation like this one, where there is that
Mhm.
back and forth. So the
Yeah.
curiosity, genuine, natural, just get curious about people, you know?
Mhm. Yeah.
There's a great
I
book I just read. It's called Super Communicators by Charles Duhigg. He wrote
do
The
yeah.
Power of
Uh
Habit. Yeah. Have you
yeah.
read the new one? That's
Duhigg,
his.
yeah. I've
Yeah,
read The
it's
Power of Habit,
really
yeah.
the new one is it's just about conversation, and a lot of the theme of that book
Oh
I think
yeah,
is
yeah.
listening.
Sorry, yeah, I
Yeah.
remember. Yeah,
You know this one?
sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're like, whew, yeah. Okay, I remember that book like really clearly now.
Hmm.
Yeah, and he was on this podcast I listened to too. So yeah, he is brilliant.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry,
There's
that
some
popped into
good
my mind like
stories.
right as you're
There's
talking that.
some good stories in that book too about like um the guy who was recruiting for the CIA and
Uh
how he
huh.
had to like it's basically the way you ask the question, right? Or like if you're actually
Right.
interested to get to the heart of how somebody feels or what they value or who they think they are. And like I love the way that there are just some simple shifts in the way you ask questions or frame questions, right? Like
Mhm.
instead of like, where'd you go to high school? Like, what was it like in high school for you? You
Mhm.
know, because you're getting closer
Yeah.
to that. Like, if you think about it, like that life experience and that story. So,
Mhm.
yeah, I love that book. I would recommend it.
Yeah. Yeah. Me too. I think there's something to be said too about asking like open-ended questions versus
Hmm.
closed loop questions. And
Yeah.
there's different approaches you can take to it. So like a couple things I started doing when because it was around the time I had started reading these books on communication. Leo Lowndes. Have you ever heard of her? She's a she has like all these different like types of books, like 92 tips and tricks on like elaborating yourself better, and it's like they're all kind of titled like that. But I had read all these books and I started working at the agency first time after I graduated, and it's like asking questions like instead of asking like, okay, so how was your day? And I'm so especially lately, like the past after I've been networking and going to chambers of
Hmm.
commerces and stuff like that for 6 months, I'm super big now on, and I've gotten better at just like cutting through like this surface level what I thought like weather talk. Um,
Yes.
it's like,
Yeah.
oh yeah, it's I guess it's fall now. It was cold on the run this morning. I'm just
Yeah.
like, I'll go up to someone, I'll say like, okay, so tell me about your day, like that,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
just let it air out.
Yeah.
And I mean, you'll find like that it is off-putting to some people, but some people appreciate that. Just a
It's probably
platform
like
to just,
refreshing. Yeah.
yeah, exactly, yeah. Or instead of saying like how is the weather, or say like what's something that's got you excited for this week? Like what are you looking
Yes.
forward to?
I love that.
Um, like something that like actual like conversational value comes out of
Hmm.
that, and it's always like it's just a rule of life to like face that uncomfortable minute in the beginning. And it's like that, like being a business owner talking to clients, it's like how can we make go through like the necessary maybe uncomfortable topics in the beginning, and then just make it
Hmm.
so much smoother as from a conversational standpoint, from a relationship standpoint, kind of moving forward. But yeah, I'm very big on that, and that was kind of a natural segue too, because I did want to talk about teaching. Um, the
Uh-huh.
way I first actually heard about you was I went to Finley. I graduated
Yeah.
spring of last year. I don't think I ever
Okay.
saw you on
Congratulations.
campus.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Well,
Yeah.
I'm online mostly now because I'm actually in
Okay.
the Akron Canton area. So that's why. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So I yeah, that's how like I came to touch you. So several people from school talked about you, Kirby, Carla Treadway, um,
Hmm.
and I spent like way too many hours in CBSL. So I mean, your name echoes in that hallways. So,
Oh.
um, but yeah, like I'd love to know like kind of how that chapter got started for you, like what you teach, how's it energize you, and some of the like the awesome impact you've been able to have through doing that. So it'll give you a platform to talk
Oh.
about teaching.
Yeah, well, thank you. I love teaching. As I mentioned, so I was started out my degree, my undergrad degree was in political science and journalism from Ohio State. And I had a minor in professional writing. So I loved writing and reading. I really loved journalism, landed in broadcast journalism, and I think I mentioned like being on camera was like my worst nightmare. So I was like, man, maybe this is not the career choice that I should
Hmm.
have went with. Like I do
Yeah.
love it now. I say that to say I
Good.
instantly understand how hard it is to be on camera. Like it's not.
Hmm.
I get that. I don't think it's easy for a lot of most people. So I did that, and then I actually met my husband there. So we met at a television station and very quickly sort of realized that the lifestyle of a television journalist was not one that I wanted.
Hmm.
So I worked every weekend for 3 years, every single holiday, every weekend.
Wow.
And a lot of times, like if there's breaking news, there wasn't a lot of but the more you would go up in a market, like that's sort of the career trajectory you get from like a Lima to maybe a Columbus to a Cleveland. And we've had lots of friends that have just went way up. And You give all that up, right? And there's not really the other thing, Andy, that I don't think a lot of people realize about broadcast news is the highest like career level is anchor. Most people want to be an anchor,
Hmm.
and but the schedule is terrible. So like
Hmm.
you either work the morning show, which is like 3 a.m. to noon, or you work the later shift, which is like 2 p.m. to 10 or midnight.
Yeah.
So I realized very quickly I wanted a family and that wasn't going to work. So I was like,
Hmm.
okay, what could work if this, like you were talking about making decisions, Andy, right? I was
Yeah.
like, okay,
Hmm.
what could work? Well, I want a better schedule and I love reading and writing and I want to make an impact. That was the other thing. I really always wanted to make an impact.
Hmm.
And I was like, well, teaching, I'll just try teaching. So I actually got my master's at the University of Finley in
Okay.
education And I
Okay.
was on the path to get, I did my student teaching, like on the path to get my teaching licensure in grades, what was it, 7 through 12. And I met a professor at the University of Findlay, Dr. Tully. I don't know if you've ever had Christine Tully
Mhm.
for anything, but I was in one of her classes. I was a graduate assistant to Professor Ward, which is also funny. Like a bunch of
Mhm.
professors, I was just like this because I could do video. Everybody was like, "Oh, can you do this video for me? Can you do this?" I'm
Mhm.
like, "Sure." So, um, anyways, this is a long-winded story. So I
Mhm.
met Dr. Tully, and another good story is like I remember one night after class, we were walking out of class, and we just had like a talk about a conversation, and she's like, "Hey, like I know how's your student teaching going?" I'm like, "Oh, I'm loving it. I'm teaching advanced, writing in they were like the AP classes in my student teaching." And she was like, "Have you ever thought about getting a PhD?" She's like, "Because if you like that work, I mean," she was like, the students that are 18 now, like they're 3 months away from college, like you should consider it. And I mean, my parents
Mhm.
both had gotten degrees later in life. Like when we were kids, they both got their 4-year degrees. So I watched my
Mhm.
parents like work through that. And I just
Nice.
never in my wildest dreams thought that I would be smart enough to get a PhD. Like
Mhm.
I was like,
Mhm.
there's not. And after conversations with Dr. Tully and Dr. Denneker, who is another really big influence on me at that time, I looked at BG, ended up getting my PhD, loving it, like absolutely loving it. Also,
Mhm.
felt a ton of imposter syndrome the first year, like, felt like the students there were speaking another language, Andy. Like, that's how
Mhm.
bad it was. I was like, I don't
Yeah.
understand how to read academic like writing but
Yeah.
you stick it out. You stick that uncomfortable part out. I mean, the first year I was
Mhm.
just like drowning. But then you just,
Mhm.
you keep going. And I had really good mentors in that program. I think that would be the theme of this story too. Really good mentors who believed in me and talked me
Mhm.
up a lot, and shared their
Yeah.
story. Where they were like, no, like you could do it. Like you totally do this. Like that I remember feeling the same way. And that got me through. And then yeah, and then I got my PhD from Bowling Green. I had my daughter during that time, and then a job opened up at Findlay in communications. And because I think Christine actually emailed me and was like, "Hey, I think you should apply for this because I think you'd be a good fit." Got the job there and started teaching and loved it. Like, absolutely love your age group. Like, people of your
Mhm.
age are my favorite.
I don't know
Like,
about
I think
that. Oh.
no, I mean, no, I'm serious. I know you guys get a lot of flack, but
Mhm.
I think there's an energy to a college campus. There's an
Mhm.
energy and there's an idealistic, like, I don't know, fresh perspective on everything. So, like, I teach the same
Mhm.
material, but I teach digital storytelling, I teach video production, I teach brand storytelling. So I get to teach and talk about all these things that I really love and am curious about and interested in. And then I get to meet students like you or your friends, and they teach me. Like, it's this very reciprocal, like, wow, you guys perspective that I never would have had. And so the
Mhm.
other thing about teaching and digital storytelling too is it's constantly changing. So there's always something new. And
Mhm.
I love it. It's very, again, like I really enjoy not only in storytelling, but in my classes, we do a lot of application. So you're learning something and then we're applying it, whether that's with a client or if you're creating a podcast in class, you're creating a video. And so through that, also, the other really um, like lovely aspect of that is that I learn so much about students. Like, we get to have sometimes really deep conversations because they're sharing stories about their lives that are pretty, I mean, oftentimes very vulnerable. And so we just to build these relationships I don't think we would have otherwise, just because of the course material, if that makes sense.
Right.
And then I mean, several of the guests on my podcast are former students that are now,
Mhm.
6, 7 years into their careers and are
Wow.
sharing with our guests how they're using storytelling in their careers. And so
Wow.
that's like fun full circle moments for me.
Yeah.
Like, I'm always
Mhm.
interested in what they're doing, and
Mhm.
how they're using storytelling and how their lives are going. It's just fun.
Yeah.
That's how
That's
I'm using.
awesome. Yeah.
And
That
yeah,
is incredible. You seem like I mean, I can tell you have a very full life and I think you have a very clear kind of North Star and what you are not just good at, but what you provide the most value in. It's kind of like that hedgehog concept. It's in this book called Good to Great by Jim Collins, but it's like this three-pronged Venn diagram. We're talking about college and PhD is like, okay, Venn diagram. We're going back to school.
Yeah.
But it's like the middle of those between what you are really good at, what you're naturally very curious of, what you're naturally very curious about,
Mhm.
and what you add the most value in. And it's kind of like the intersection of all those three things, because it's just like an endless loop of where you can dive in to make a successful career. And
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah,
I think
so I think
another thing,
go ahead.
I was thinking before I lost it. Another thing that guided me in the last couple of years, because I'm also learning how to set boundaries and say no. That's
Yeah.
my Achilles heel, and has been
Uh-huh.
throughout my career. But one of the things that I'm learning is like paying attention to what gives me energy and what sucks it. I know
Mm,
sometimes you do have to do the things that suck your energy, but I think the more that I'm conscious of, oh my gosh, I really love this and I feel like I have energy after I do this versus like, oh, I feel so tired after this task.
yeah.
And that to me is important. And I've also learned like I have less patience with like stuff that doesn't matter. Like time is my
Mm,
most valuable asset. So I'm like, do not waste
yeah.
my time. Like that's big for
Yeah.
me now. Like if this is a waste of like I'll look at my calendar. I do like calendar audits. I don't know if you've ever
Hmm.
done that. That's
Yeah.
always fun.
Hmm.
You're like, okay, was this a good use of time or was this like a time suck? Or and again, how did I
Uh,
feel? Like paying attention to like that energy level. Like conversations like this, I'm gonna come off and like that's a great start to my day. Or, that
yeah.
energy level high versus like sitting through a meeting. Like
Yeah.
sometimes
Well,
you're like, put a
I
minute
heard
email.
I heard such a good conversation on this too. It's like your couch friends versus your treadmill friends. So it's like
Oh,
you
I
have
love that.
friends where you go to like afterwards, like, okay, I'm ready to run a marathon. I'm ready to run through 10 brick walls. Then you have your couch
Yeah.
friends where you're like, man, like I need to socially recover after that.
Yeah.
Um, so, but I
Yeah.
think there's almost value in both because you
Yeah.
need you need the very kind of spark and
Mhm.
the the energy because if you're go all the time like that, but there's also friends that I have. There's people like I told you, I've been making a ton of phone calls lately. Is just like the friends that like actually force you to be introspective and put you into that
Yeah.
maybe uncomfortable place of like, okay, maybe I'm not seeing this about myself and I should actually take this perspective and kind of run this loop through a little bit. And there's some value that comes out of that too. And it's not always the most motivating or comfortable situation to put yourself in. Um, but there is value in kind of having perspectives one way or the other. But I think that is
Absolutely. Yeah.
huge too. That is huge.
Yeah.
Like doing calendar audit. That was actually something I was going to ask you about. Something I ask pretty
Mhm.
much every guest is like, what does your ideal day in the life look like? I know if you ever heard of Ali Abdal, he's this YouTuber, but
Mhm.
he's big on like time allotment and energy and basically getting the most fulfillment out of your schedule and life
Yeah.
and career and so forth.
Mhm.
Um, but basically, he has this practice where you go in and you create like a separate Google Calendar, and you say, okay, money is no object. I know what my goals are, what I get the most fulfillment out of, what my life's mission is. What are the actions I can take and fill this ideal calendar so that I'm fulfilled, I'm enjoying my day, and all the boxes are checked. This is like the gold standard. And how can I take the actions I need to in my career, my life, my relationships now to orient my schedule to look like that in the future? But if you were to run that loop through, what do you think
Yeah.
your kind of like ideal day in the life would look like?
Oh,
And
that's
it's
such a
okay
good
if it's similar to what it is now. So
It's not. I'm trying to get there. So, kids just throw a whole fun loop into that. But luckily, I do feel like lucky because I do have a lot of control over my schedule, which was another reason I liked higher ed. Like that look at
hmm
that time in my life, I'm like, ooh, I like this. Because being in
hmm
journalism where you have like no control, like the news
hmm
dominates what your day's going to look like. To now. So I would say I'm an early bird. Like I love the mornings. I really enjoy the mornings. So and I typically am at my best when I'm up early. So I'll get up around like 5:30 in a good rhythm.
Nice.
I'll
Nice.
read a little bit, pray or meditate, and then I love to move. So like I enjoy working out. I It's not been happening for me. I'm having to do these later in the day, my workouts, which I don't like, but I always get them in.
Mm.
But I run, so I'm a runner. So I love morning runs. Like it's my favorite thing because you
Nice.
just feel
Yeah.
so accomplished after you run.
Mm-hmm.
And then my kids are up at like 7:30. We have to get ready for school. So if I can get that done before 7:30 and then have they're off from like 7:30 to 9, by 9 o'clock they're in school. I think I also am fresher the earlier in the day. So
Mm-hmm.
usually from like on a perfect day, I'd be doing things like from 9 to noon that are like my projects. Like right now, I'm working on a book project. If I'm preparing for a
Nice.
workshop or something like that. Yeah. So that would be
Mm-hmm.
like, I love to have that's like my selfish time. Like, and then the rest of the day from like 12 to 4, my kids get home around 4, is like everything else. So that's emails, that's, podcast edits, that's client work, that's consulting, all that stuff. Like I'll keep that. If I could in the afternoon, that'd be great. And then I also, another thing that I've done that's really helped, it's not a daily routine, but I try to stick to like one thing a day. So like Mondays are podcast days, Tuesdays are
Mm-hmm.
primarily client work,
Mm-hmm.
Wednesday, Thursday, Friday is like
Yeah.
students.
Like
That
themes.
helps
Yeah.
me.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, like it helps me because like you get into that. It helps you, I think, get into that flow state. And if you're in there, you can give yourself permission to just go versus like, because I have so many different roles, like
Mm-hmm.
parent, business owner, speaker, teacher. I like to stay in that headspace because then if you get dinged, that's the one thing I don't like about email, Andy, that drives me nuts. Like I've learned to like turn the email off until like later. Like I look at it at the beginning of the day and the end of the day because I'm like,
Yeah.
you get interrupted, like you're writing or you're working on a project and then bang, email. You feel like that anxiety and you're totally it takes time to get back on track. I hate the ping
Yeah.
pong. You haven't
Yeah.
got that for me. I started doing that last January with the theme days, and that has helped my productivity a lot because I would
Mm.
be ping ponging all day long, like work on this project, 15 minutes here, 20 minutes here, and I just felt so overwhelmed. It would make me
Yeah.
feel so overwhelmed and that I wasn't doing enough. And it was just not good. So I've stuck to like, okay, I'm going to be very disciplined. It doesn't always work out that way. Like some weeks are heavier with certain, like maybe client needs or something. So, or student needs. So you just kind of have to balance it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a really good take, and that's very top of mind for me as well because I'm so like okay, like first year of business, like I'm gonna give my like I said, we're high performers, very hard on ourselves. Um,
Mm-hmm.
that is my biggest probably deliberation, right? Sticking point,
Mm-hmm.
opportunity for improvement right now is the ping ponging because I'm very active on like LinkedIn. I'm trying to be very responsive in terms of email to
Mm-hmm.
clients and so forth. And they even say like growing like LinkedIn has been my biggest like has been so good for my freelance career.
Mm-hmm.
And they even say like okay I'll like always keep the browser tab open because then
Yeah.
it knows and it knows that the algorithm knows that you're engaging. I'm like how the hell am I supposed to get any work done? Like it even
Right. You're just like,
notifies you in the browser. It's like
right.
two, three, four, five. I'm like so, and it's just like that temptation. It's like okay, just check in
Mm-hmm.
really quick, answer these comments, send these messages,
Mm-hmm.
send these connects. So, and I relate to that 100%. Is like you feel like at the end of the day, it's like I didn't get as much done as I should have. I feel like I wasn't focused. Like, and so yeah, you hit the nail on the head with that right now. I think it's just I think starting your day on the right foot is a big thing too
Mm-hmm.
because
Oh, yeah. It's
um,
huge.
it I start to like again like preaching to the choir is just get one more thing done, one more thing done, and before you know it, it's 1 o'clock in the morning, and then that's like this whole perpetual loop of the next day getting up late, and then
Mm-hmm.
so it's
Yeah.
almost like setting the foot in the ground, and it's just this is foundational stuff, and that's why like having that calendar, that gold standard is like you
Yeah.
have this
Where are
reference
you
point
at?
of like yeah, like what you're working towards, and then you can kind of make the delineation between there and then where you are.
Mhm.
And so yeah, I think that that was a very good insight and resonated with me a lot personally. So thank
I
you.
will say too, I will say too, Andy, just from one high performer to another, like having kids changed my whole life because they get home at 4 p.m. And
Yeah.
if I am trying to work when they are home, it is not productive by any means. And so I try really hard to like when they're home from the hours of like 4 to 8, those are theirs. That's like sacred.
Yeah.
Like mommy is 100% here to take you to soccer practice. I had I had my son. He was at swim practice this summer, and I was answering emails on my phone, like while he was
Hmm.
at swim practice. And he
Yeah.
gets out of the pool and he goes, "Mom, you didn't even see me." He goes, "You
Hmm.
didn't even see me do my stroke because you were on your phone." And I was like,
Oh, I would have been like, well, I'm here, aren't I? Yeah.
I
That
know, but see,
that
but I
shows how
wasn't
you are. Yeah.
present. He was like, "You weren't
Mm.
present." And to me, it's like I
Yeah.
want as it looking. I'm also like looking ahead, like 10 years. Like if I to your core
Mm.
values, if I say my core value is my family, and I want to have a good, strong relationship with my kids, like I know in 5 more years, my little 6-year old's probably going to have his own phone.
Hmm.
You know what I mean? Like
Yeah. It's gonna be a real menace. Yeah.
modeling, right? And so that was a big thing for me. So I think
Mm.
I'm also happier and I feel more centered when I know that I'm acting in those values, like you said. And
Hmm.
that's been a hard lesson for me too. Like, because work is easier for me than dealing with my kids, to be honest.
Hmm.
Like, it's so much like I love working, but they're harder sometimes. But it's easier when
Hmm.
I'm fully present, especially with them, because they
Hmm.
know that, and and that's just like I feel better. I mean, I don't. Maybe I'm not as productive, but at least I know that I'm building those relationships because that's the oldest cliche in the book is like time flies,
Yeah.
and
And
they're gonna.
yeah, dude. And I just had this perspective shift too. Is like when you talk about impact and legacy and stuff like that, it's so easy to get lost. And like I said, very top of mind for me. It's very when you're like really hustling, trying to, and I have the opportunity to be like selfish with my time to an extent,
Mhm.
because I don't have the responsibilities of kids and the. But when you think of like what would the 100-year-old version of yourself say, like
Yeah.
like how much is this actually going to matter? Like the whole business ownership, it's humbling, and it's
Mhm.
also the uncomfortable situation because it is. By the way, that soundbite work for me is easier than doing with my kids. We're gonna clip that, and that'll be what comes out of this episode. Um,
Sorry.
but but it is. It's almost like it's
True.
it's easier. It's like productive procrastination. It's easier to just focus
Yeah,
on
that's a good way
work.
to
Like
put it.
it's easier for me to just okay respond to emails, get on LinkedIn,
Mhm.
build
Mhm.
websites. Be as best as I can at what I do, and then all this other stuff that is actually the most important can get pushed to the back burner because it is uncomfortable to put yourself in those shoes. So,
Mhm.
um, but yeah, so thank you for bringing that up and the transparency about talking about some of those topics because I don't think they are talked about enough.
Okay. Yeah.
Um, and something that like one thing I would like to double click on too is like, what was did your perspective or personality change or shift at all towards career or life or just fulfillment in general when you went into more business ownership sort of territory? Like what was kind of the mindset shift there and how do you apply those lessons kind of to your life and teaching, running a family, and what are the biggest things you've learned owning a business?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it's learned I've had to learn how to like to your previous question, really kind of chill out. Because I've had to learn that like I can't do it all. Delegation was really hard for me, still is very
Yeah.
hard. And so I had to learn to trust other people with things. And to let them help me. So I hired an I guess an office administrator and she's more like a virtual assistant, I guess. And so I feel like she coaches me every week because she'll be like, Megan, I can do that for you. Let me do that.
Yeah.
And then I'll be like she sees it on my face. She's like, oh, and I'm like, oh no. And she's like, no, just we have a
Yeah.
really good, I love her. She's like my
Mm.
coach in that respect sometimes, but she's like, no, I'm gonna
Nice.
do that this week. This is what I'm like, okay. And then it's like a relief, but it's still hard for me. And so I think owning a business, and then it has helped two things: delegation and asking for help. So like,
Mm.
I learned to ask my family and friends, like, can you take my kids? Can you help this? Can you or I'll accept help. Like, hey, do you want me to come? My mom is always like, I'll come make dinner and blah blah. And I have this like independent streak. Like, no, I can do it myself. But
Yeah.
now I've learned like it, but it's so much easier if you just let people help
Yeah.
you.
Mm-hmm.
Because I
Mm-hmm.
think being in business, there's another good book called The E Myth, which is about
Yes, Michael
work.
Gerber. Just listen to that. Yeah.
Yes.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. So like working,
Mm.
like being that, what is it, a technician versus like a true
Technician,
business.
entrepreneur.
Yes,
Yeah.
entrepreneur. And so that was, I think, like I would lean towards someone that would get stuck in that technician role had I not learned those
Mm-hmm.
two things. And those have, like I said, really helped me in life. Like and again, I have like those, I'm learning to set boundaries. Like, I'm not going to miss a practice. I'm not going to miss a game if I don't have to. Like, if I can
Mm-hmm.
control my schedule, I'm not I had a really good friend his kids are in college, a great like networker in town, Andy. And he was like, Megan, just don't commit to things in the evenings. Like, that's okay. And I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
that's so hard because all these networking things happen in the evenings, but there's that
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
out of like, I'm gonna miss somebody's game, or I'm
Mm-hmm.
gonna miss and again, that goes back to like what your values are. So he's like,
Mm-hmm.
he's super successful in town, right? Like he's a city commissioner now. Like, I don't know, like he's just
Mm-hmm.
the best. And his kids are
Yeah.
he has an awesome relationship with his wife and kids. He's coached all of his kids' sports. And he
Mm-hmm.
gave me that advice. He's like, listen, people just knew that I wasn't going to be around in the evening, but I made up for it with like early morning meetings. Like, people knew that, and it was okay. He's like, everything was
Mm-hmm.
fine. So it's giving yourself permission. That's part of that delegation or like boundary setting too. Like, if you want to be all these things, you have to delegate, ask for help, and you are going to have to set some boundaries that you stick to, or else you're going to feel the other thing that I learned too, Andy, was like, I like being proactive as opposed to reactive. And I
Mm-hmm.
think that in business, being in business now for a few years, like, I try to be proactive as much as I can. You can't all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes things happen, but you learn as you go, oh, this happened, I can avoid that this next time. So, and all of that
Yeah.
planning, like with your day, and that's to me being proactive, because I don't
Mm-hmm.
like, and if I don't set those boundaries, I'm just bound to be reactive. And that
Yeah.
I don't like that, you know. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, that was a long-winded answer, but those three things I think really have taught me a lot about life, and that's just business has sort of forced it.
Uh-huh. Yeah, I think those are great points. And I like I said, very top of mind going through a lot of this stuff too. So
Yeah,
is they and I got the perspective as well. Is like that was the whole one of the whole reasons I started the podcast as more of like a networking tool.
me too.
Because as you know, you make content about other people, they are much more likely to say yes to a conversation, and that's just
Yeah.
and it's been like from a personal standpoint, like I grew up with speech disorder. I have two hearing aids and hearing loss, so I wanted to get better at like elaborating my words because I was starting to go to these networking events, and I was like I am so out of place. Like, Megan, you should hear like the conversations I would have with myself in the car before like
Oh.
going into these things. I was like, oh man, I do not belong here. But
Hmm.
it's like crazy because we just had like the 1 year anniversary of the show, and you look back at like all these 50 plus people you interview, and
It's awesome.
it's like building a mountain with layers of paint. Um,
But yeah,
so
that's
like, but
awesome. No, I love
yeah, but
that you're
but
here and
yeah,
you're doing it.
thank you. No, thanks. But that's what I hear. Like that exact story you're talking to the city commissioner. It's you like you go into the conversation. It was kind of a little bit the same. Like when we first started chatting, it was like they have a successful career, they have the family, they're very fulfilled, they have everything that on the outside they look like like perfect. And then you actually say that to them. You're like, well, like how do you do it? Like are you like you're
Hmm.
perfect? And they're
Hmm.
like, what the hell are you talking about? Like no, I'm not.
Yeah.
Um, but that when we even touched about it a little bit earlier is no one like even the people that we all look up to kind of don't have it figured out, and that's especially true I think in business.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
And like people my age that are getting into careers, they're considering business ownership, internships, all these different things. They start to see like they go to work at Marathon, or they go and do their own thing, or they interview someone that's did what they did and they want to build something similar, but start to realize is that like, okay, even these people at the top that you hold a high regard in your mind, like they're really just figuring it out as they go too. And there's a ton of
Absolutely.
reassurance in that.
Yeah.
And it's very empowering, but it's also like this scary meme where like, okay, we're both in the water, neither of us know how to swim, but there's some shared like assurance with that too. So
Yeah.
I
No,
see
that's
that
a
a
great
lot in
point.
business. Yeah.
That is a good point. I see that too. And I think I love podcasting too, or just opening up these conversations to remind people of that. Like
Hmm.
not everyone has it all figured out and everybody's on their own. The other thing I think that kind of is in tandem with imposter syndrome is comparison. And I think because of social media, which is,
Hmm.
we all know, a very curated space, right? We see the highlight reel. I think there is, at least for me, there's always been this, and I think this comes with high achieving achievers, the gap versus the gain. I don't know if that's another good book.
Hmm. Yeah.
But it's like you're constantly like, I don't know what I'm doing. And like I was saying, but that's like, as I get older, I'm like, well, that's a good thing because that means you're challenging yourself and you're moving on to the next thing versus like you said, like, oh, this person has it all figured out. Like they don't. They just leveling up, right? And so, but there is a lot to learn from people who have been where you are. And I enjoy having those conversations because just like Rick was the guy I mentioned, like that was huge for me. Like it was, he just gave me permission to be like, you don't have to do that. Like it's okay. You're not gonna, your business isn't gonna fail if you don't go to every single networking event in the evening, Megan.
Hmm.
Like relax
Yeah.
because you don't want to be there. You're nervous. Like you're guilty. There's all these like negative feelings. So, but the more I talk to people too, they're like, oh, I did this and this, my business worked out this way. And I think it's really neat to see other people's journeys and sort of take what you can, but recognize that yours is yours alone. And like that's, you get to make life what you want. And I will say this, I'm not that old. I'm going to be 40 this year, but I have seen a huge shift because of the internet, like, and
Hmm.
the digital, especially in marketing. Like
Yeah.
when I was in college, you were either a like print journalist or broadcast, or there was no digital anything. And I've seen so many of my friends who are my age sort of make their own careers, make
Hmm.
their own jobs, make their own businesses. And a lot of it has to do with all of this technology that we have access to. And
Hmm.
to your point earlier, the real exciting thing for people your age, now you can think about the life that you want, right? And you
Hmm.
have these, in a way, you have these people that have sort of paved the way for you. And you can start to imagine like this beautiful life where, and it doesn't have to revolve around your 9 to 5, right? Like I'm not stuck in that journalism cycle like I would have been, right? Because I could have,
Hmm.
and I didn't, you have to kind of take that risk. There's always risk, but I think
Hmm.
it's cool. I have moms, friends who are single moms that have, are working part-time hours online and they're doing great. Like, and they're there for their
Hmm.
kids and they're, going to yoga classes and have, it's
Hmm.
just it's great.
Yeah.
I think it's
Hmm.
awesome. And I think the
Hmm.
part of that is just like trusting yourself. If we go back to the beginning of the conversation, trusting
Hmm.
yourself to carve that life out and figure out how it's going to work for you and building that community and network of supportive people around you, that can make that happen too. Like what you are doing at the networking events and you are doing with clients and you do. Like I have a huge support at the University of Finley, which is awesome. Like
Hmm.
my dean and my chair, they're all super supportive of me. And so I think that makes a huge difference in yeah, what your career and your journey, your life really could look like.
Hmm.
So
Yeah,
I
and I love that.
yeah.
Yeah, I love that because I mean, we're all kind of forging our own path too, and there's so much value in the advice of like counseling other people, seeking out advice, learning from their stories, but then also taking the feedback and realizing that like, okay, like how can I use these inputs to create an output that's like uniquely my own, like,
Mhm.
um, and I think that's something that you kind of break out of from the school ecosystem is that okay, there's no assignment, there's no task. I think that's a really good positive. I think I cut out there for a sec, but it's like a really
You did,
like
yeah.
good
But I mean,
analogy
but
to
just a
have.
bit.
Okay, I think
Yeah.
we're good now. But yeah,
Yeah.
to kind of like put a bow on this whole thing because I want to be really mindful of your time, and that's what we just spent a lot of time talking about. Very much value your time and very grateful. So,
Thank you.
um, like, how can like if you could give like one parting word of advice for like business owners to tell their stories better, to be more empathetic on camera, to really like hone in on this power of storytelling to benefit their business, like what would you say?
So I would say sort of understand what we talked about earlier, that storytelling is not about you. It's
Mm-hmm.
not this ego drone on about yourself. There are all
Mm-hmm.
these. I think I read a statistic, Andy, 500,000 marketers in the United States call themselves storytellers. The magic of storytelling is in the connection with someone else. And so to connect with someone else, there has to be that back and forth. There has to be that curiosity and care for your audience. And that is where relationship is formed. And that's where you get all the benefits of storytelling. So as a business owner, one of the best ways that you can encourage people to understand your heart, why you serve them, how you serve them, is to share your stories, is to be vulnerable, admit your failures. I think people are craving that in this environment. Like, we are tired of, I don't know, I speak for myself, but I think like people are tired of perfectionism. They're tired of polished. We want real. And so
Mm-hmm.
I as a consumer am more than happy to pay at double the price for my latte if I know that I'm supporting the local coffee shop, because I love the
Mm-hmm.
baristas. Like, I know
Mm-hmm.
all their
Mm-hmm.
names, they know my order. I love that feeling. And I think that that's because I feel like I know that person. I know that they're involved in my community. I have friends and a lot of our clients, so who they're the people who are willing to go on camera, and they're the people that really care. So that's the other thing I guess I would say too. Know your core values. Know why you're doing what you're doing, and have some type of purpose that is larger than yourself, and tell stories from that, because essentially all you're doing when you're sharing your story is you are showing, not telling, you're showing people how you live out that value system. And that is naturally going to attract the ideal client. It's going to
Mm-hmm.
attract the person that you want to serve, because, and then once you form that connection with them, right? Once they've connected to you, they want to know more about you, they tell you about themselves, you learn more about how you can serve them better.
Mm-hmm.
You serve them better, and then they'll follow you forever. You could, a great story. I know we're coming close on time, but our first
Mm-hmm.
client was a business owner. His name's Rob. He owns the Met in downtown Lima. And so he hired us. He was my husband got out of television to start this video production business. And Rob knew him from being on TV. So he's like, oh, sure, I'll take a chance on Kyle.
Mm-hmm.
And Rob is, I can't tell you, Andy, one of the most giving, like, eccentric personalities I've ever met. He's one of the people that I really look up to in my life in general as a person. But
Mm-hmm.
he was not afraid to put in, this was in 2016. Okay. He's like, I'm going to be the face of the business. We put out these videos where he dressed up as Elf and delivered kegged cocktails to local businesses. Like, it was his idea. It's who he
Mm-hmm.
is. We did not come up with that. Like, he just is who he is. But in COVID, um, he had built up like a giant engaged community on Facebook. So COVID hits, he's a restaurant, right? He is we had a video ready to go for him the day restaurants closed down, where he was like, okay, this is what we're going to be doing at the Met. Like, you can still get carry out. And because he's so involved in the community, and because when you go into the Met, it is a place, like he told us, he wants it to be like Cheers, where everybody knows your name, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
we just showcase that a little bit on Facebook. We tap into like glimpses of that. You go in there, you feel that from Rob.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, he pivoted in 2021 was his best year that he ever had as a restaurant.
Nice.
2021. And I know I don't want to toot our own horns, because I know it's a lot of it as Rob and the customer service. But some of it was the fact that he had people following him, and everybody went online in 2020. All of a sudden everybody's online. He already had a presence there. He was already doing that, and so he could pivot his business really fast. And because people wanted to see the Met continue to grow, and they knew how much he cared about that community, because he does other things, like he is super involved in the schools and he coaches a softball team. Like, people wanted to support Rob, right? And so we were just telling stories about how Rob was also supporting the community, donating food. Like, all of these things are showing his value system, and he's sharing that, and that helped his business grow even in the middle of COVID. And I think that is important. Like, that, I wish I could just tell people, like, it's that consistent presence, and it's just sharing those everyday examples and experiences of who you are as a business and a business owner, and showing up. Like, people connect to other people. We know that. Like, science proves it. Like, I want to support you, Andy. I know you now. I want to support you. Like, after this call, be like, hey, like, maybe we could be referral partners, because I have people ask me to do websites all the time. That, I think, is important, because you want to trust somebody. And once you earn somebody's trust and you build a relationship and you like the person, you're going to want to naturally support them through whatever they do, right? You could totally pivot to something else. But if I like you as a person and you've done good work and I trust you and we keep that relationship, I'm going to want to see you do well. And does that make sense? I mean, I think that it's subtle, but people just don't get it. They're like, I think a lot of people are still focusing on products or like client testimonials, and they don't want to put themselves out there. And I'm like, well, you're just missing out on this whole extension. Another way that I put a reason to get out on video, I explain to people this way: like, a video is just an extension of your personal network. Like, you would not miss out on face-to-face networking. Like, you said this earlier too, video is the closest way to connect if you're not face-to-face. So that's it's like an extension. Your digital network is just an extension of your face-to-face personal network, right? So my goal too, if I really feel like I'm going to connect with somebody, and I do this, think about your own patterns online and who you support, right? I creep on people for like a year sometimes before I'll reach out and say, I think you're doing really cool things. Would you like to have a Zoom call? And I can't tell you how many people I've met locally and out in like California, Greece, like people who are doing the same things that I hop on a Zoom call with, get a feel for, then I follow them online and I feel like I know them a little bit, and then I will support them, then I will do. And it's even better for my brick and mortar friends who, people can come into your shop or they can come into your restaurant. They can actually meet you. And then they're like, oh, you're just like you were online. This is exactly what I expected, or even better.
Yes. Wow, dude, Meg, oh my God, that was so good.
I'm very passionate about this.
Yeah, no, it's so true.
It is.
Yeah, and it is, because I mean, what you do, you just storytelling, and so much of that intersects with, and like the way the advent of everything for business owners, like that intersects with marketing so much nowadays, especially with the changing of the means of communication, and even with the ability to create content at scale. Like, there's a lot of automated stuff now. There's a lot of ways to get more out faster. That just, it makes it even more important to create the connection, because it stands out even more against this whole sea of stuff.
Right.
So yeah, you went so far above and beyond with that. Like, that was such a good answer.
I love it. You can tell. I think about it all the time. I preach to people, and I'm around a lot of entrepreneurs. So I'm in Akron, Canton. I'm not in Columbus. And I'm around a lot of entrepreneurs who are they're not like, I have my friend in California. She's like, I wish you lived here, because all my clients need this. And I'm like, oh, I don't know if it's caught on here yet, that people understand. It's funny too. Rob was our very first client, and it's almost like a curse, because I thought it was going to be so easy to just find clients. And I'm like, Rob he is especially to realize that in 2016, he cut all his like radio, he cut all of his TV, and he went all in on social media. Now he does more radio. But he was like, I'm going to go all in on this thing, and I think it's going to work. And I mean, it's awesome for him. But it takes the right personality. It takes a person who's willing to put themselves out there and come up with ideas. And they're fewer and far between than I thought it would be when I started, Andy. But most people just want to be like, oh, and I've learned that too. Like, if I've learned to feel out, like, if somebody doesn't want to be the face of their business, like, you're not a good fit for our. I used to take everybody. That's another business lesson. And then it just would fizzle because it wasn't a good match. Now I realize, like, you really, like, when I talk to clients, I'm like, are they a potential Rob? That's what I think of.
Yeah. That's a good filter. Yeah. No, because it is, I mean, you see it even like in the advent of business now is like everything, some of the, like, just doing case studies on some of the most successful, like backed businesses, like their customers, their following, or their actual, their actual advocates. It's like, it's founder led businesses who've created content about them serving other people, building the business, their process. And the people that can like build a founder led brand, because so much of like video, like that goes into so much into building your brand, like, because and I even had it, and I know you have too, like, people see your talks, they see you on video, and when you go to a networking event or a chamber of commerce or something like that, and people have seen you before, like, that's such a, I don't want to say advantage, but it's just you already have that shared kinship. It's almost like you're picking up on like the second or third date, and not to that extent, but it's
that's
like
a good way to put it. They feel like they know you.
It's an advantage, and it's something that, it's, you have to at least consider the value. And so thank you again, like, so much. If people want to learn more about you, we'll link your TEDx talk, Home Place Creative, and the show notes and stuff. But where can people go to follow you, learn more about you, and get in touch?
Yeah, I'm trying to establish myself on LinkedIn now, Andy. So I'm at Dr. Meg Adams on all social platforms. So Instagram, I have like 2 videos on TikTok. That's like my next adventure.
Hey, more than me.
But LinkedIn and Instagram are mostly where I'm at. A little bit on Facebook, but at Dr. Meg Adams, that's where you can find me. And then obviously the website.